Have you ever wondered where God is when life feels silent? This is the story of Esther, a woman who rose from obscurity to royalty, risked everything to save her people. The story begins beneath the golden sun of Persia, in the mighty city of Susa, a city carved from wealth, pride, and power. The streets shimmered in the heat, filled with the scent of myrrh and spices. Merchants called out over the noise of camels and servants, and towering palaces stood above it all, homes of those who served one man, King Xerxes, ruler of 127 provinces stretching from India to Egypt. Inside the royal palace, a celebration was already roaring to life. For 180 days, the king had thrown an exhibition of glory, feasts, parades, and endless wine to show the world the wealth of his kingdom. Marble pillars lined the great hall, hung with linen and purple cords tied with silver rings. Gold goblets sparkled on every table, each one unique. Wine flowed freely, and laughter rose to the high ceilings. Xerxes sat on his throne, tall, proud, his beard perfectly groomed, a robe of white and gold on his shoulders. Around him, nobles and generals toasted him endlessly. To our king, to Xerxes, who rules over the world. He smiled, a man who believed the world belonged to him. As the feast drew toward its final days, Xerxes leaned back and whispered to his attendants, his eyes gleaming with arrogance and wine. "Bring Queen Vashti to me," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone near the throne to hear. "Tell her to wear her royal crown. I want the nobles to see her beauty. Let them see the jewel of my kingdom." The attendants bowed and hurried away. But time passed, and Vashti did not come. A quiet ripple spread through the room as word reached the king. The music faltered. "She refuses, my lord," one of the servants whispered carefully. Xerxes blinked, as if he hadn't heard right. "Refuses," he repeated, his tone darkening. "My queen refuses my command?" The men nearby lowered their heads, afraid to breathe. "Yes, my king." The silence that followed was heavy. For the first time, Xerxes' pride had been touched. His face hardened, and anger burned in his eyes. "Then she will never again enter my presence," he said coldly. "Let her crown be given to another, someone more worthy." And just like that, Vashti was gone, banished from the palace, erased from royal life. The celebration ended. The music died. But the story was only beginning. Months passed. The noise of the palace faded into memory, and life in Susa continued. In a quieter part of the city lived a man named Mordecai, from the tribe of Benjamin, a Jew carried into exile generations earlier. He worked in the royal court as a minor official, but his heart belonged not to Persia's power, but to his people and to his God. Mordecai was a kind man, wise and steady. He had raised his cousin, Hadassah, like a daughter after her parents died when she was a child. Hadassah, that was her Hebrew name. But here, in Persia, they called her Esther. She was gentle and thoughtful, her eyes deep and curious, the kind of beauty that came from both grace and quiet strength. She worked diligently in their home, but she often paused to look toward the palace in the distance, unaware how soon her life would change because of it. One afternoon, Mordecai returned home, his face lined with news. "Esther," he said, setting down his scrolls, "the king has issued a new command. He is gathering young women from every province, the most beautiful in the land, to choose a new queen." Esther looked up, surprised. "A new queen? After Vashti?" Mordecai nodded. "Yes. The search has begun. They will bring them to the palace under the care of Haggai, the keeper of the women." He paused, his eyes softening. "And Esther, you may be chosen." Esther froze. The idea felt impossible, like being told she might touch the stars. "Me," she said quietly. "But I'm no one. Just a girl among our people. And a Jew at that." Mordecai stepped closer, his voice calm. "Listen to me, child. You've always been different. Not because of beauty alone, but because of your heart. You honor others. You listen. You think before you speak. Those things matter, even in a palace." He looked at her with affection, then with quiet seriousness. "If you are chosen, do not tell them of your people or your family. Keep it in your heart. Watch, learn, and trust God to guide you. Esther hesitated, then nodded slowly. She didn't understand it all, but she trusted Mordecai. She always had. Days later, the city stirred again. Chariots arrived from distant provinces, filled with young women chosen for the royal selection. Esther stood among them, uncertain but composed. Her eyes took in the towering gates of the palace, doors she never imagined walking through. Inside, they were welcomed by Haggai, the king's eunuch and keeper of the women. He was a stern man, efficient and loyal, used to the rhythm of palace life. But something about Esther caught his eye, a quiet grace that didn't try to impress, but somehow did anyway. "You," he said, studying her face. "You will be given special care." From that moment, Esther was moved to the best quarters and provided with fine oils, perfumes, and attendants. Yet even in this sea of luxury, she remained grounded, kind to the servants, humble with the others, never boastful. The months of preparation began, 12 months of beauty treatments, training in royal customs, and learning the ways of the court. For some, it was a dream. For Esther, it was a test of patience and purpose. She thought often of Mordecai, who came daily to the palace gate to hear how she was. Whenever she saw him from the distance, she felt reassured, a reminder that she was not alone. At night, she prayed quietly, not for favor, but for wisdom. "Lord," she whispered, "I don't know why I'm here. But if you've placed me in this place, help me to do right." As time passed, each young woman was brought before the king, one by one. Some left smiling, others never returned. When Esther's turn came, she felt her heart pounding. Haggai looked at her kindly. "Remember what I told you, be yourself. You don't need to ask for anything more than what you already have." She nodded, and when she entered the king's chamber, the air seemed to shift. Xerxes, now older and perhaps wearier from years of rule, looked up. His eyes softened as they met hers. There was no forced charm in her face, no desperate attempt to please, just calm strength. She bowed gracefully and waited for him to speak. "What is your name?" he asked. "Esther, my lord," she said quietly. The simplicity of it, no title, no embellishment, intrigued him. He spoke with her, asked questions, and she answered with intelligence and respect. She didn't flatter, she simply listened, as though she cared to understand the man behind the crown. By the end of their conversation, the king smiled, genuinely. "Bring her the crown," he said. And just like that, Esther, the orphan girl from a foreign people, was made queen of Persia. Trumpets sounded across Susa. The people celebrated, and the king declared a great feast, the Feast of Esther. But in the quiet of her heart, Esther didn't feel like celebrating. She felt the weight of what had happened, a mix of awe, fear, and the whisper of something divine. That night, she looked out from her balcony over the glowing city, the air warm and full of distant music. "Why me?" she whispered. And though the stars said nothing, their silence seemed to hold an answer she couldn't yet see. Esther fulfilled her new role with grace, careful to follow Mordecai's guidance even from afar. Though she wore a crown now, she never forgot her roots or her faith. Mordecai still worked near the king's gate, keeping watch, not for power, but for her. One evening, as he went about his duties, he overheard two guards, Bigthana and Teresh, whispering in low voices behind the courtyard wall. Their tone was dark, their words dangerous. "When the king passes through the lower gate, we strike," one said. "No one will suspect us," said the other. "We'll make it look like an accident." Mordecai's heart raced. He waited until they left, then hurried to send word to Esther. "Tell the king," he wrote, "2 of his guards plan to take his life. It is urgent." Esther wasted no time. She told the king, giving Mordecai full credit. The matter was investigated, the men were found guilty, and the report was written in the royal records, but Mordecai was not rewarded. Not yet. Still, he said nothing. He had done the right thing, and that was enough. For a while, peace settled again over the palace. The days passed in quiet splendor. But behind the scenes, the wheels of fate were turning. New faces rose in the court, and among them was Haman, a man of influence and ambition. He had power, favor, and pride, and before long, the king set him above all other officials. Everyone was commanded to bow before him as he passed. Everyone except one man. Mordecai. Whenever Haman walked by the gate, Mordecai simply stood still, respectful, but not bowed. It didn't take long for word to reach Haman. "There is a man who refuses to kneel before you," his servants told him. "A Jew named Mordecai." Haman's pride turned to fury. But he wasn't satisfied with punishing one man. No, he wanted revenge on all of Mordecai's people. That is where the next chapter begins, with one man's pride setting the stage for a crisis that would test the courage of a queen and the faith of an entire nation. In the quiet stillness of her chambers, Esther sat by the window, her crown glinting in the last light of sunset. She had been lifted from obscurity to royalty, a story too great to understand. But deep inside, she felt the tremor of something greater than herself, a call she couldn't yet name. Sometimes destiny doesn't begin with thunder or glory. Sometimes it begins with a quiet choice, to be faithful in the place where you are, even when you don't know why you've been placed there. The sun rose over Susa like molten gold spilling across marble rooftops. The city stretched awake, alive with the noise of merchants, servants, and the steady heartbeat of an empire. In the heart of the palace, power shifted quietly. The king had promoted a man named Haman, the son of Hammedatha, an Agagite. He was wealthy, proud, and brilliant in politics. But behind his charm was something darker, a hunger for honor that could never be satisfied. The royal decree went out. All officials in the king's gate must bow and pay honor to Haman, whom the king has elevated above all. The courtiers obeyed. Whenever Haman entered the palace courtyard, the people bent low, their foreheads nearly touching the ground. Everyone bowed, except Mordecai. He stood tall, hands folded behind his back, his eyes calm. At first, Haman didn't notice. But soon, whispers reached him. "My lord, the man who sits by the gate, he will not bow." The next time Haman entered, he looked for him. And there he was, Mordecai, still, unmoving. Haman's jaw tightened. He paused before him, waiting for the expected gesture. "Nothing. Do you not know the king's command?" Haman asked, his voice low but sharp. Mordecai met his gaze. "I am a Jew," he said simply. "I bow before no man as an act of worship." The words were not meant as defiance, but conviction. Still, to a man like Haman, they were unforgivable. Haman left with rage burning in his chest. He could have ordered Mordecai punished immediately, but no, he wanted more. In the days that followed, he learned about Mordecai's people, the Jews, scattered across the empire but holding to their own laws and God. The more he thought of it, the more his anger grew until it twisted into something monstrous. "If one man defies me," he said to his advisers, "let us see how his people survive when the empire turns against them." He began to plot, not just against Mordecai, but against an entire nation. Weeks later, Haman stood in his private chambers. Golden lamps flickered against carved ivory walls. Before him, a small table was set, and on it lay Purim, small stones used for casting lots. Superstition ran deep in Persia. When Haman wanted to know the best time to strike, he turned to a chance, or rather, to fate. The priests of his household murmured prayers as the stones were thrown across the table. They rolled, clicked, and came to rest. Month by month they cast, until the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. Nearly a year away. "Then it is decided," Haman said coldly. "There will be plenty of time to prepare." He went to the king that very day, his voice smooth as oil. "My lord," he began, bowing deeply, "there is a certain people scattered among your provinces. Their customs are different from all others, and they do not obey your laws. It is not in your best interest to tolerate them." The king looked at him curiously. "What do you propose?" "If it pleases the king," Haman continued, "let a decree be written to destroy them. I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury for the men who carry it out." Xerxes leaned back, half listening. He trusted Haman. He didn't know who these people were, and truth be told, he didn't care. He removed his royal signet ring, the seal of absolute power, and handed it to him. "Do with them as it seems good to you." Haman bowed low, suppressing a smile. That night, scribes were summoned. Orders were written in every language of the empire, sealed with the king's own ring. The decree went out by swift riders. On the 13th day of the 12th month, all Jews, young and old, men, women, and children, are to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. Their possessions are to be taken as plunder. The messengers thundered through the streets of Susa, their torches lighting the night. As dawn broke, the city awoke to confusion and dread. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into chaos. When Mordecai heard the decree, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, the ancient garments of grief. He walked through the streets of Susa crying out, my people are doomed." No one stopped him. Some pitied him, others turned away. At the palace gate, he sat in mourning, his head covered with ashes. Word soon reached Esther's servants. One of them came to her chambers, trembling. "My queen, your cousin Mordecai sits at the gate in sackcloth. He weeps in the streets." Esther stood quickly. "What? Why?" "We do not know, my lady. But he refuses to enter the palace." Esther felt her chest tighten. She sent one of her attendants, Hathach, to find out what was wrong. Hathach found Mordecai near the gate, his eyes red, his clothes torn. "The queen sent me," Hathach said. "She asks what troubles you." Mordecai handed him a copy of the decree, the royal seal visible on the parchment. "Show her this," he said. "Tell her what Haman has done. Tell her she must go to the king and plead for our people." Hathach hurried back. Esther unrolled the decree, and her hands began to shake. She looked up, her voice breaking. "Go back to him," she said softly. "Tell him everyone knows the law. If anyone, man or woman, approaches the king without being summoned, they are put to death unless he extends the golden scepter. I haven't been called in 30 days. Hathach returned with her words. Mordecai listened quietly, then looked toward the palace towers. "Tell her this," he said. "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone will escape. If you remain silent, deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows, perhaps you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." When Hathach spoke those words to Esther, she sat motionless for a long time. Her breath came shallow, her eyes glistening. She stood and walked slowly to the window. Outside, the palace glowed in the afternoon sun, beautiful and suddenly suffocating. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "For such a time as this." Then she turned to her servant. "Go back to Mordecai. Tell him to gather all the Jews in Susa. Tell them to fast for me, do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then—" She paused, her voice trembling but firm. "Then I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." The city of Susa grew strangely quiet over the next 3 days. In Jewish homes across the city, lamps were dimmed, meals left untouched. Families prayed together in whispers, the sound of weeping echoing through the narrow streets. Mordecai knelt in the dust near the palace gate, fasting and praying. The same words rose from his lips again and again, not in anger, but in trust. "Lord, remember your people." Inside the palace, Esther had shut herself away. Her maids watched in silence as she set aside her royal robes and jewelry. She covered her head and prayed, not like a queen, but like a daughter seeking her father's strength. At night, she lay awake, the words of Mordecai echoing in her heart. "Perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this." She thought of her parents, long gone, and of the God who had guided her path. "If this is my purpose, Lord," she whispered, "then give me courage to walk it." On the 3rd day, Esther rose before dawn. Her attendants helped her dress, not in mourning clothes, but in her royal gown of gold and white. The fabric shimmered like sunlight, but her eyes were steady and solemn. As she approached the king's hall, her steps echoed in the corridor. Her heart pounded so loud she thought others might hear it. 2 guards opened the great doors, and the light from the throne room spilled across the marble floor. Inside, the king sat on his throne, surrounded by nobles. The air was thick with ceremony and perfume. Everyone turned as Esther entered, uninvited. The moment froze. Every man in the room knew the law. No one approached the king unsummoned. The penalty was death. The king's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in surprise. Esther stood still, her face calm though her hands trembled slightly behind her gown. She waited, not daring to speak. Then the king's expression softened. He leaned forward, and slowly, he extended his golden scepter toward her. A sigh swept through the room. Esther approached, her knees weak with relief, and lightly touched the tip of the scepter. "What is it, Queen Esther?" The king said warmly. "What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it shall be yours." She bowed. "If it pleases the king," she said softly, "let the king and Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared." The king smiled. "Bring Haman at once," he said. "We will do as she asks." That afternoon, the golden hall of Esther's private banquet shimmered with wine, laughter, and perfume. The king reclined on cushions beside Haman, who could barely contain his pride. Esther poured wine with her own hands, a gesture of honor. The king looked at her with affection. "Now, my queen," he said, "tell me your request. Whatever it is, even half my kingdom, it will be granted." Esther smiled faintly but said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, my king, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to another banquet I will prepare. Then I will answer the king's question." Xerxes nodded, intrigued. "It shall be so." Haman left the banquet walking taller than ever, his heart full of pride. But as he passed the palace gate, there was Mordecai, sitting as always, refusing to bow. Haman's joy curdled into hatred. He clenched his fists, his face twisting. That night, he told his wife Zeresh and his friends everything: the honor, the banquet, the insult. "None of it matters," he growled, "so long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the gate." Zeresh leaned forward, her eyes cold. "Then have a gallows built, 50 cubits high. In the morning, ask the king to hang Mordecai on it. Then go to the queen's banquet happy." Haman smiled. "Yes, yes, that will please me." And as night fell, workers began building the gallows, the wood rising high into the dark Persian sky. That night, Esther sat by her window, looking at the faint lights of the city below. The first step had been taken. The king had not refused her. But she knew the real battle lay ahead. Somewhere beyond those palace walls, Mordecai still prayed. The people still fasted. The decree still stood. She whispered softly into the night, "Tomorrow, Lord, let your hand be seen." And far away, unseen by her, the first threads of divine reversal were already being woven in the restless mind of a sleepless king. Night fell over Susa. The lamps burned low in the palace corridors, their light flickering like tired hearts. The city outside was still, but the palace of King Xerxes was not. The king could not sleep. He shifted beneath the silken covers, eyes open, staring at the golden patterns on the ceiling. Something pressed against his chest, not pain, but restlessness. It was as though a whisper from somewhere unseen refused to let him rest. Finally, with a sigh, he called out, "Bring me the book of the Chronicles, the record of my reign. Read to me." Servants came at once, carrying a great leather-bound scroll. They unrolled it carefully and began to read by the light of the lamps. "In the days past, there was a conspiracy against the king. 2 of your guards, Bigthana and Teresh, sought to assassinate you. The plot was discovered and stopped by a man named Mordecai, who reported it at the gate." The reader paused, waiting for instruction. Xerxes frowned slightly. "Wait. Mordecai, yes, I remember that name." He sat up, suddenly more alert. "What honor or reward was given to this man for saving my life?" The servant looked down the scroll. "Nothing, my lord." The king blinked. "Nothing?" "The man uncovered a plot to kill me, and he received nothing." He rubbed his beard thoughtfully, shaking his head. That cannot be. He stood, pacing, energy returning like the first light of dawn. Who is in the court? He asked. One servant peeked through the curtains. Haman, my lord. He has just entered to speak with you. The king smiled slightly. Ah, good timing. Send him in. Haman entered with his usual pride, his robe sweeping across the marble floor. He bowed low. May the king live forever, he said, trying to mask his eagerness. He had come early, hoping to request Mordecai's execution on the new gallows built in his courtyard. But the king spoke first. Haman, he said, there is a man I wish to honor. Tell me, what should be done for someone the king delights to honor? Haman froze. Then slowly, a smile curled on his lips. Who would the king want to honor more than me? He straightened and spoke with smooth confidence. For the man the king delights to honor, he said, let a royal robe be brought, one the king himself has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, with a royal crest upon its head. Let one of the king's noble princes lead him through the city square, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Xerxes clapped his hands in delight. Excellent! Perfectly said. Then, with cheerful authority, he added, now go at once. Take the robe and the horse, and do just as you have said for Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Leave nothing undone. Haman's heart stopped. He blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. My lord Mordecai? Yes, Mordecai, the king repeated, oblivious to the torment he had just unleashed. See that everything is done exactly as you've described. Haman bowed stiffly, his mind spinning. The humiliation burned like fire. He had come to destroy Mordecai, and now he was ordered to parade him through the city in honor. Morning sunlight spilled across the streets of Susa. The royal horse was prepared, adorned with embroidered cloth and the king's crest. The robe shimmered in gold and white. Mordecai stood near the gate, unaware of the king's decision. When Haman approached, leading the horse, the sight must have been almost surreal. Haman's jaw clenched as he spoke. Put on this robe, he said through gritted teeth. You are to ride the king's horse. Mordecai blinked in disbelief. What is this? The king wishes to honor you, Haman muttered. Now get on the horse. Mordecai hesitated, then obeyed. And so the most powerful man in Persia, Haman, the royal official, took the reins, leading Mordecai through the streets of Susa, shouting in a strained voice. This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. People stopped and stared. Some cheered, others laughed quietly, amazed at the sight. And in that moment, a strange reversal began, quiet, small, but unstoppable. When it was over, Mordecai returned to his place at the gate, humbly continuing his duties. But Haman went home with his head covered in shame. That evening, Haman burst into his home, slamming the door behind him. His wife Zeresh and his friends looked up in alarm. What happened? Zeresh asked. The king honored Mordecai, Haman spat, and I was forced to lead him through the streets like a herald. His friends looked uneasy. Zeresh frowned deeply. If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not overcome him, you will surely fall before him. The words hung heavy in the air. Before Haman could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Royal eunuchs entered, bowing. The queen's banquet is ready, they said. The king awaits your presence. Haman forced a smile and straightened his robes. But as he left, his steps were slower, his confidence cracked. He could not shake the feeling that something unseen was shifting against him. That evening, Esther's private dining room was lit with hundreds of oil lamps, their flames flickering like stars. The table was spread with fruit, wine, and dishes of gold. Esther stood poised in her royal gown, calm, radiant, but her heart thundered beneath her chest. She knew this night could change everything. The king and Haman entered. Esther bowed slightly, then motioned for them to sit. As the meal went on, conversation flowed easily. The king was in high spirits. He smiled at Esther. Now, my queen, he said, tell me your petition. Whatever you ask, even half my kingdom, it will be granted." The moment hung in the air. Esther looked down for a brief second, gathering courage. Then she raised her eyes, steady and full of quiet strength. "If I have found favor with you, my king," she began, "and if it pleases you, spare my life and the lives of my people." The king frowned, confused. "Your life? Who would dare threaten the queen?" Her voice trembled, but she did not look away. "For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I would have kept silent, but this threat is far greater." The king sat back sharply, his expression darkening. "Who is he? Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther turned her gaze slowly to Haman. "The adversary and enemy," she said softly, "is this vile Haman." Haman froze, color draining from his face. The king's face went pale, then red with fury. He stood so suddenly that his chair fell backward. The air seemed to tremble. "Haman!" he roared. "Is this true?" But Haman could not speak. His mouth opened, yet no sound came out, only a faint gasp. The truth hung in the air like smoke after fire. The king's breath came fast. He looked at Esther, his queen, the woman he had chosen, the one he cherished, and realized that through his own signet ring he had condemned her people to death. His eyes flashed with confusion, betrayal, and anger. "Enough," he said, slamming his hand on the table. "I must think." He turned and stormed out into the palace garden, his robes flowing behind him. For a moment, the hall was silent, just the flicker of lamps, the smell of wine and spice, and the sound of Haman's ragged breathing. Then panic set in. He fell to his knees before Esther. "My queen, please, I beg you, spare my life." Esther stepped back, trembling but resolute. "You brought this upon yourself," she said quietly. "Please," he cried, crawling forward, reaching for the edge of her couch where she reclined. "You do not understand. I only sought the king's favor. I was misled." The words spilled out, desperate, insincere. But even as he pleaded, fate moved faster than he could. Outside, in the garden, the king paced among the columns, his mind a storm of fury. The night air was cool, but his anger burned hot. He thought of his decree, the one sealed by his ring, sent to every province. He thought of the families who would die, the innocent faces condemned by his own hand. And then he thought of Haman, that clever, poisonous voice that had whispered in his ear. He turned sharply and strode back inside. The moment he entered the banquet hall, his eyes widened. Haman had fallen across the queen's couch, his hands gripping the cushions near her feet, pleading for mercy. To the king, it looked like an outrage. Will he even assault the queen while she is with me in the house? He thundered. Haman's face went white as marble. He stumbled backward, shaking. Two guards stepped forward instantly, pulling a black hood over his head, the symbol of death. One of the eunuchs, Harbona, spoke up. "My lord, a gallows stands at Haman's house, 50 cubits high. He built it for Mordecai, the man who once saved your life." The king's eyes blazed. "Hang him on it." The words were final. And so they took Haman away, the man who had plotted to destroy a nation, and hung him on the very gallows he had built for another. The sound of the crowd's murmurs filled the city as dawn broke. A chapter of wickedness had ended, but the decree of death still lingered like a shadow. The next morning, Mordecai was summoned to the palace. He entered slowly, still uncertain what awaited him. But when he stepped into the throne room, he froze. Esther stood beside the king, radiant, unbroken. The king extended his royal signet ring, the same ring he had once given to Haman. "I have given Esther Haman's estate," he said. "And you, Mordecai, shall have my signet ring. Take authority over his position." Mordecai bowed deeply, tears in his eyes. Then Esther spoke, her voice trembling with urgency. "If it pleases the king," she said, "and if I have found favor with you, let an order be written to overrule the decree that Haman wrote, the one sent to destroy my people." The king sighed heavily. You know that no edict written in the king's name can be revoked." Esther's heart sank, but the king continued. "However," he said, "you may write another decree in the king's name as you see fit. Seal it with my ring." Mordecai and Esther exchanged a look, a mixture of relief and determination. That same day, royal scribes were summoned. The new decree was dictated in every language of the empire. The king grants the Jews in every city the right to assemble and defend themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force that attacks them, and to take the property of their enemies as plunder. Riders mounted on swift horses carried the message from Susa to the farthest provinces. The sound of hooves thundered through the city once again, but this time the message carried hope. When the decree reached the people, the city of Susa erupted in celebration. Lamps burned through the night. Joy replaced fear. The Jews dressed in fine clothes, feasted, and gave gifts to one another. Not long after, Mordecai was seen walking through the palace in royal garments, a blue and white robe, with a great golden crown and a purple cloak of fine linen. The people bowed in respect as he passed, but Mordecai's eyes were humble, his heart full of awe rather than pride. He had once sat at the gate in sackcloth, and now he walked through the palace of kings. And beside him, Esther, once a frightened orphan, now stood as the queen who had saved her people. Months later, the fateful day arrived, the 13th day of the 12th month, the day the first decree had called for the Jews' destruction. But this time, things were different. Throughout the provinces, the Jews gathered together, ready to defend themselves. The fear of Mordecai, now second in rank to the king, fell upon all the officials. Many stood with the Jews rather than against them. And when their enemies came, they found not frightened victims, but a people standing united, resolute, and protected by the unseen hand of God. That day, deliverance spread across the empire. And when the fighting ceased, joy filled the land. The people celebrated, gave thanks, and remembered what had been done for them. They named the celebration Purim, after the lots Haman had cast to choose their destruction. What had been intended for their end became a festival of life. That evening, after the noise of the feast had quieted, Esther walked alone through the royal garden. The moonlight shimmered on the fountains. The stars glowed softly above, silent witnesses to all that had passed. She looked up and whispered, "Lord, you turned fear into courage, ashes into honor, and despair into joy." She touched the golden bracelet on her wrist, a gift from the king, and smiled faintly. "For such a time as this," she murmured, "you placed me where I needed to be, not because of who I am, but because of what you can do through one willing heart." Her words drifted into the night air, carried by the wind over the sleeping city. And for generations to come, her story would be told, not as one of chance or beauty or politics, but as a testament to the quiet power of faith and courage in the face of impossible odds. Sometimes, God's presence is not loud. There are no burning bushes, no parted seas, just small, quiet choices that ripple through eternity. A sleepless night. A conversation overheard. A queen's trembling courage. In those moments, unseen hands weave what no one else can see, turning fear into faith, despair into deliverance. And so, the story of Esther reminds us. You don't have to be the strongest or the most powerful to change the course of history. You just have to be faithful and willing to stand for such a time as this. The city of Susa awoke to an unfamiliar sound, not weeping, not dread, but laughter. The streets that once echoed with fear now rang with the noise of celebration. Banners hung from the balconies. Candles burned in every home. The air smelled of roasted grain and sweet wine. Children ran through the streets holding bits of colored fabric, and old men sat in doorways with tears of relief glimmering in their eyes. A city that had once waited for death was now learning to breathe again. From the highest balcony of the palace, Esther stood watching the sunrise over the city. The light fell across the rooftops like gold dust, and for the first time in many months, her heart felt light. Behind her, Mordecai entered quietly. He had changed, not only in status, but in spirit. The same man who once sat in ashes and sackcloth now wore a robe of royal blue and white, the king's seal hanging from his neck. Yet humility still shaped every movement. Esther turned and smiled faintly. "I used to watch the sunrise from this balcony and wonder if I'd live to see another." Mordecai joined her side. You were brave, Esther. You walked into death's shadow and came out carrying light. She looked down at the city. It wasn't bravery, she said softly. It was fear, turned into obedience. Mordecai nodded. That's all courage ever is. For a long moment, they stood in silence, watching the city come alive below. Later that morning, the sound of trumpets filled the palace courtyard. The king's messengers gathered as Xerxes addressed the people from his throne. Let it be known throughout my kingdom, he proclaimed, that Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew are held in the king's highest honor. By their wisdom, deceit has been overturned, and the peace of my provinces restored. The people cheered. Mordecai stepped forward, bowing deeply. May the king live forever, he said, and may justice and mercy guide your rule. The king nodded with approval. He had grown fond of Mordecai, a man unlike the flatterers who filled his court. When the ceremony ended, Esther and Mordecai walked together through the palace gardens. Flowers bloomed again after a harsh season, as though creation itself rejoiced. Esther glanced at her cousin. It's over now, isn't it? Mordecai hesitated. For now, yes. But peace must be remembered, or people forget its cost. Days later, in the royal library, scribes worked tirelessly under Mordecai's direction. Scrolls were spread across the table, filled with inked letters and seals. Esther entered quietly, watching as he dictated to the chief scribe. Write to all the Jews in the 127 provinces, Mordecai said. Establish these days as an annual remembrance, the days when sorrow was turned to joy, mourning to celebration. They shall be called the festival of Purim. The scribe paused. Purim, my lord? After the the lots. Mordecai smiled. Yes. Let the symbol of our intended destruction become the mark of our deliverance. Esther stepped forward, her voice gentle. And let it also remind them that God can work even when he seems silent. Mordecai turned, a soft pride in his eyes. Then we will write that too. 4 hours, they worked, their words becoming law, their memories turned into a legacy. Weeks later, Susa glowed once more with music and light. Tables overflowed with bread, figs, and wine. The sound of laughter spilled into the night. It was the first feast of Purim. Esther moved through the crowd quietly, watching the people, young and old, rich and poor, rejoicing together. No one bowed to wealth or title. They bowed only in gratitude. Children sang songs of deliverance. Mothers held their little ones close, whispering prayers of thanks. As Esther passed, people nodded with reverence. Some reached out to touch her robe, not as worship, but in honor. She smiled and greeted them warmly, humbled by their love. A little girl, no more than 6, ran up to her with a flower crown. Queen Esther, the child said breathlessly. My mother says you saved us all. Esther knelt to meet her gaze. No, she said softly. God saved us. I just did what he asked. The girl tilted her head. Were you afraid? Esther smiled faintly. Yes. But courage is what you do even when you're afraid. The girl grinned and placed the flower crown on Esther's head before skipping away. Mordecai approached, watching the exchange. You've become the people's hope, you know, he said. Esther looked down at the crown of flowers. Hope belongs to God, not to me. I just learned to trust him with my fear. That evening, after the celebration ended, Esther sat alone in her chamber. The sounds of laughter had faded to silence. She walked to a mirror of polished bronze. For the first time, she saw not the orphan girl who had once hidden her name, but a woman who had walked through fear and found her purpose. Her reflection looked back, calm and steady. There was no crown on her head now, just the faint petals of the flower crown left by a child. The door creaked open. Mordecai stepped in, smiling softly. I thought you might be here, he said. You used to come here after long days when you were little. Esther smiled. Some things don't change. He stepped closer, his eyes warm. You've grown into more than I ever imagined, Esther. I only wish your parents could see what their daughter has become. Esther's eyes glistened. Sometimes. I think they can. They stood in silence for a long time, two lives bound by faith and love, shaped by the quiet providence of God. Mordecai finally spoke, his voice thoughtful. When Haman plotted our end, it seemed as though the heavens were silent. But I've learned that silence does not mean absence. Esther nodded slowly. No. It means he's still writing. Mordecai smiled. Then may we always trust his pen more than our fear. The next morning, sunlight poured through the palace windows, warm, golden, alive. The air smelled of cedar and fresh bread. Couriers came and went, bearing letters of celebration to every province. Mordecai stood by the balcony again, watching them disappear into the distance. The scrolls they carried bore his seal, a symbol of deliverance, of hope preserved. Esther entered quietly. She had traded her royal gown for something simple, a soft robe of linen, her hair unbound. The queen was still within her, but the young girl from years ago lingered too. She stood beside him, silent for a while. When I first came here, I thought this place was made of gold. I thought power meant comfort. Mordecai smiled faintly. And now? She exhaled. Now I know that power is only as bright as the courage behind it. He nodded. You've learned well. Most people spend a lifetime chasing the wrong kind of power. She turned toward him. Do you ever wonder why God chose us for this? Why he didn't speak through thunder or a prophet's voice? Mordecai's eyes softened. Because sometimes, the loudest miracles are written in silence. We were just pages, he was the author. He looked out toward the horizon. We don't always see his hand moving. But he was there when you were brought to the palace. He was there when the king couldn't sleep. He was there when you found the courage to speak. Esther's eyes glistened with tears she didn't bother to hide. Then perhaps all this, even the fear, was part of his design. Mordecai smiled. Every thread, every silence, every moment. Months passed. The festival of Purim spread far and wide. From India to Ethiopia, every Jewish home remembered the days when despair turned into dancing. In distant villages, families gathered around fires, telling their children the story of Esther, the orphan girl who became a queen, and the queen who became a savior. Little girls played in the streets wearing paper crowns. Old men retold the story with laughter and tears. And in the royal archives of Persia, a scroll was sealed with the words, "These days of Purim shall never cease among the Jews, nor shall their memory fade among their descendants." Back in Susa, Esther sat by her window one evening, watching lanterns drift down the river. The glow reflected on the water like scattered stars. Mordecai entered quietly, as he often did. "The city glows tonight." "Yes," she said softly. "And for once, it's not from fear." He nodded. "You know, when people tell your story, they'll call you brave." She smiled faintly. "I was terrified, Mordecai. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's obedience despite it." Esther looked down at her hands. "Do you think they'll remember that God never spoke directly in our story?" He paused, thoughtful. "Yes. And maybe that's the point. Maybe he wanted them to see that even when he seems silent, he's still present, weaving redemption in the background." The years moved gently onward. Peace rested over the land. Mordecai's influence grew, yet his humility never faded. Esther remained queen, wise, gracious, and deeply loved. One night, the two met again on the same balcony where everything had begun. The moon hung low, silver and full. The city slept in peace below. When I was chosen to be queen, I thought my life was decided for me. But now I see, purpose doesn't come from position. It comes from faith. Mordecai smiled. "And you lived yours beautifully." He turned to her, his voice quieter now, older. "Do you know what I've learned, Esther? Deliverance doesn't always come through signs and wonders. Sometimes, it comes through one person who refuses to stay silent." Esther's eyes shimmered in the moonlight. Then maybe that's what it means to be chosen. The wind stirred softly between them, warm and gentle. Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of laughter from a Purim celebration drifted through the night. They stood together, silent, not in sorrow, but in peace. For the first time, the story felt whole. The story of Esther ends quietly. No thunder. No voice from heaven. No pillar of fire. But if you listen closely, you can hear God between the lines. He was there when a young girl was taken from her home. He was there when a fearful queen stood before a throne. He was there when the dice were cast, when evil rose, and when courage answered. In every silence, God was writing. In every risk, He was revealing Himself through ordinary people. Esther's story reminds us that faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting that God is present, even when you can't see Him. You may never wear a crown. You may never stand before kings. But you may find yourself standing at a moment that matters, a moment when courage whispers, "This is why you are here." So when fear tells you to stay silent, speak. When the future looks uncertain, stand firm. And when God seems quiet, remember, He's still writing your story. For such a time as this. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs courage today. And don't forget to subscribe to Light of the Word, where stories of the Scriptures come alive with heart, hope, and meaning. Because sometimes, all it takes is one story to remind us that faith still matters. What lesson did you learn from this story? And comment Amen if this story inspired you.